All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Most Valuable Podcast. I am Mark Williams with my colleague,
Victor Castro.
and we are just two dudes who do real estate for a living. And today is going to be more of an educational podcast to all of our potential buyer clients out there. And we're going to explain the pros and the cons, try to give a little bit of insight on getting what's called a seller credit. Now, the reason we want to talk about this is, I would say, Victor, wouldn't you say, like, in this type of environment where interest rates are super high and people are trying to have enough cash to get into a home or get a lower interest rate, seller credits are pretty common right now.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And there are some pros to getting seller credits, but there also are some cons to it. And we just want to inform you so you understand the process and what that kind of means when you get a credit or if you don't get a credit, and what's going to be best for you ultimately depends on the situation, the home you're trying to get, and the advice from your real estate agent. And if it's us, we will be giving you the right advice. So let's get into it. I know, Victor, you are currently helping a client right now, and they are shopping for homes, and they're in a position where a seller credit is going to be very beneficial to them. So why don't you explain a little bit of what actually a seller credit is, and maybe in this instance, what is the reasoning for negotiating or trying to negotiate to get this credit?
Yeah, sure. So the process to buy a home costs money. There's so many moving pieces to the transaction. You have escrow fees, title fees, property taxes, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so that all equals what your closing cost is going to be. And it's never the same thing for one buyer or another.
Yeah.
We got to make sure that you understand that. But rule of thumb is that it's about 2.5% to 3% of whatever the home is going to cost, depending, right? And so that adds on to what your out-of-pocket cost is going to be. So you have your down payment, which is the minimum amount that the lender is going to request for the program that you're using to purchase your home, whether it's a conventional loan or an FHA loan or others.
Yeah.
And that's the portion of the home that you're paying up front that you don't owe anymore. And then on top of that, you have your closing costs, which is another 3 to 2.5%.
So you're saying, and we'll just reiterate that. So you're saying, if I'm doing an FHA loan, let's just say we're doing an FHA loan, and someone asks us, hey, how much down payment do I need? With the FHA, it's as little as 3.5%. That's 3.5% of the purchase price.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct.
And that amount is the actual down payment. So that's the amount that goes towards the balance of the house.
Yes.
Now you're saying there's something else in addition called closing cost, which can range from 2.5% to 3%, depending on the situation and type of loan. And that's in addition to the down payment.
Correct.
And that's 2.5% to 3% of the price of the home.
Correct.
Okay, cool. I just want to make that clear. So in reality, if you're buying something FHA at 3.5%, in reality, you actually need at least 6 to 7% in cash to be able to purchase the home.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
So this is the money that you have to plan ahead for when wanting to purchase your home. And we're not going to talk about financial assistance, but sometimes that comes into play also.
Yeah.
But more or less, that's what you want to prepare for. Now, what happens if you're short? Maybe
I only have the down payment.
Correct. Maybe you're buying a $600,000 home. Let's just give you an example. And 3.5% of 600,000 is about 20. I would say 22.
It's like $22,000.
About $22,000. Okay. And you need an additional 2.5% for your down payment. That's another
Yeah, that's like another
15.
15K.
That's like
So you
another
need
15.
about 37K.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
You're
what-
15K short.
you're 15K short. What are you going to do? There's different ways of structuring a offer to make it make sense for you. And this is where seller credits
Yes.
come into play. The seller of the home that you're offering to purchase is maybe capable of crediting you some money at the close of the escrow, which is going to cover that amount of money that you're short, $15,000.
Where does that credit come from, Victor? Is it coming out from their bank account?
It comes from the proceeds of the sale. So essentially, if you're buying it at $600,000 and it was listed at $600,000,
Yeah.
then that means the seller is actually netting $585,000.
Okay. So they're essentially from the money they're making from owning this home, some of their equity.
Correct.
They're giving you some of their equity.
That is correct.
Why couldn't I just get that money in cash? Does it have to be credited towards like my closing costs?
No, it doesn't. You can apply it to different things, such as maybe a buy down, whether it's a permanent buy down to help you lower your interest rate. You can apply it to a temporary buy down as well. But I mean,
Can it be used for my down payment?
no, it cannot.
Okay. So essentially closing cost or rate buy down.
That is correct.
Okay. What if there's extra? What if I don't use the whole 15? What happens?
If you can't apply towards anything, then that money goes back to the seller.
Okay.
Okay. So it isn't like you can ramp up this credit.
I can't buy a new couch with
No,
the
you
extra.
can't. Or, sometimes you want to do inspections or you want to do renovations on the home. And you're like, well, it's going to cost this much to fix this. You can't apply to any of that. It's just on the financial side of the transaction.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Good to know. Now, that being said, and kind of side note, you can have the seller cover cost. We can have the seller cover the cost to fix items that showed up on the report, and that would just be separate.
Correct.
That's just the seller's going to pay those invoices
At the close of escrow.
at the close of escrow
Mhm.
from their proceeds.
Mhm.
And that's not a credit. They're just the ones that are going to cover that bill.
That is correct.
Okay, cool.
So there's different ways that your agent can put you in the best position to make things happen. If the home needs renovations and you want to have the seller pay for them, you can have that added at the end of the escrow, but not be necessarily impacting your closing costs or anything like that.
So the positive of getting a credit, just so everyone understands, and I'm just going to recap what you said. I think you explained it perfectly. But the positive is, in a hypothetical, we're buying a home for $600K. I have the $22,000. Maybe I have a little bit more, but I have about $22,000 in cash, and I'm ready to buy. And I've been saving up, and then you're busting this thing on me like, wait, no Diddy. Then you're telling me that all of a sudden I need to come up with another 3%.
Mhm.
Damn, Victor, where am I supposed to get this money? Hey, don't panic, Mark. We can try to negotiate to have the seller help cover all or some of that closing cost. And by what they do is they credit you some of their equity, and that gets applied to the closing costs when it closes. But it can only be used to cover the closing costs or maybe to buy down my interest rate to make my payment a little bit more affordable so I can get approved.
Yes.
So that sounds like a win. Why wouldn't I want to do this all the time? Like, why would I want to spend my own money to cover these closing costs? Is there any benefit to just not to spending that money? Or is there a benefit to actually, if I have the money, should I be asking for a credit?
Well, that's
what you think?
That's what this podcast is about. Okay, we're gonna give you the facts, and maybe you've used the seller credit before. Maybe just keeping it real. You weren't told how it really works, and that's why we're doing this. Okay, look, if you're going to go up in price to cover your closing costs, and what do we mean by that?
Yeah,
let's say the seller isn't willing to give you a credit at the asking price.
Same house, 600K.
Same house, 600K. Same scenario. You're not able to obtain the seller credit because It's early in the market. The home is in really good shape, and the seller feels like he can get more money.
Yeah.
So why would the seller, give you a $15,000 credit if he doesn't have to?
Yeah.
Well, the only way you're going to get it is if you go up in price.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, you go from 600,000 to 615,000. Now you're offering to net the seller the $600,000 that he's asking for at list price,
Okay.
right? But you're buying it for 615.
Okay.
Now he's able to give you $15,000 at the close of escrow, and he's going to be able to net the same amount of money that he was looking to net.
I got you. So essentially, you're financing. I mean, in all scenarios, you're financing that closing cost. But in this scenario, you're actually offering more and then just asking for it back.
That is correct.
Now, so in that case, then wouldn't the house be worth? Why wouldn't he just want 615 and not give you credit? Doesn't the house have to appraise at that value?
Yes, that's also a risk that you have to think about is the home going to appraise at what you're offering? And if it doesn't, then you're at square one.
You might be in a position where they don't want to give you the credit.
Maybe he doesn't want to lower the price. Maybe it appraises at what it's currently at list price.
Yeah.
And he's going to say, you know what, if it's appraising at list price and I'm going to have to net less because I need to give you this credit, then I'm not going to move forward.
Got you.
And this home isn't going to sell. It's going to go back on the market.
So there's some strategy to it.
Yes.
And every home, you can't just expect that the seller is going to want to give you a credit.
That is correct.
I would say in this environment, what I'm seeing, and when we're talking about this environment, we're talking about, interest rates in the mid 6s to mid 7s, and it's been fluctuating for, going on like 2 years now, as opposed to when, rates were in the 3s and some people were getting in the 2s. Man, I've even heard of like high 1s, right? Where credits were kind of unheard of. You were actually more than likely paying more for the home, right? But now to kind of to assist with making payments, quote unquote, affordable, if you want to put it that way, we've been seeing sellers be a little bit more lenient and more willing to give credits. And even those, when we're helping clients sell their property, it's a conversation that we have explaining to them that, hey, buyers in the market, this is kind of what they're looking for, because you got to remember that their interest rate is going to be double what yours is. So they may be looking for some assistance in making that payment a little bit easier to handle, because, they're going to be paying double the mortgage of what you're paying for the same home.
Right.
But so just go over some of the pros. So the pros are, if you're a little bit short on money, a seller credit may be able to get you into a home that maybe you wouldn't be able to afford because you wouldn't have all the money needed up front to get into that home. And then another positive is, I would say, it kind of opens up a little bit more like homes available for you if you're able to get that credit. But I don't want to call it a negative, but it sounds like one of the negatives is that money, quote unquote, is not free money.
It's never free money.
It's not. It's never free. It's money that eventually does get paid back.
I mean, if you don't have the money to come out of pocket up front to essentially transfer from your bank account into the escrow account to cover those costs, then you're going to finance it. Whether you got the home for a cheap, whether the seller is netting less or not.
Yeah,
you're still financing.
The seller is losing on the money.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's money they don't really see because it's all on paper and all in equity. So if you're listening to this, sometimes sellers, if they have an agent that kind of explains things to them, sometimes they're a little bit more willing to say yes, because it's not like this money is coming out of their bank account. It's just coming out of a net sheet, right? It's just coming out of a piece of paper, and Mark is saying, hey, seller, instead of walking away with $200,000, you're going to walk away with $185,000. And they don't really see they don't see a minus in their bank account, right? Because it was minus 15K out of their bank account, they probably would say no.
Yeah,
If you
right.
saw that red number on your bank app, like, whoa, wait. I'm not giving this guy 15K.
Yeah.
No. They can pay that. So on the seller end, you're just really selling it for less.
Less.
Okay. On the buyer end, you're not buying it for less. You're buying it for what the seller is willing to sell it to you for. So if it's 600K and they're giving you 15K credit, technically the seller is willing to sell that to you for 585. And you're financing $15,000
Into your loan
over 30 years. So
it's not free money.
It's not free money. And in the grand scheme of things, if you never refinance or anything like that, that 15K would cost you more than 15K, right? So this is where some of the negative is you got to understand that money is on your loan balance and it's accruing interest every day, right? So it's not money that, oh, I bought it for 600 and I got 15K credit, so I really bought it for 585. No, you still bought it for 600. They sold it to you for 585, but you bought it for 600 and you're paying interest on the 600, not on 585.
Why? Very simple. You didn't have $15,000 to begin with. There was a missing piece to the puzzle, and we made it happen. We kind of put it on paper and made it work for you to get into the home, but you're still financing those $15,000.
Yeah. And in the grand scheme of things, the opportunity cost is worth it, right? I'm here to say getting credit is not a bad thing. The opportunity cost is worth it because the way homes appreciate with equity, the equity you make will offset the interest paid on that extra money financed. Okay?
Renting never does that.
Exactly. However, if you had the money, my thing is when I tell my clients is if we have the money, then there's no point in asking for a seller credit, okay, to cover your closing costs, right? Hear me out. There's no point in asking for a seller credit to cover your closing costs because you do not need to finance that extra money. Instead, just offer less on the home. So same position, but you have that 15,000. So same client, let's talk about the same client. Same client buying the $600,000 home, but you have all the money in your bank account, in your savings, 401k, checking, whatever, wherever you're getting it from. You have the money for your down payment, 3.5% plus the 2.5 to 3%. And instead of offering 600 and asking for credits, we're just gonna offer 585.
Lower the price.
Right? Yes, if we put the two scenarios together, the option where you're offering less is gonna pay more money up front out of pocket. However, you're buying the home for $15,000 less. Okay, so you're gonna appreciate equity quick. You have more equity, quote unquote, if the equities raise at the same pace. And then two, it's going to cost you less over 30 years because you're not financing. You're paying zero interest on that closing cost.
You know, now that I think about it, I had a really interesting conversation with a client of mine that, heard about seller credits, and he's like, hey, how come we didn't negotiate a seller credit into my offer? We just dropped the price on the offer and that's it. I'm like, you didn't need to.
Yeah.
Now that I remember, I had that conversation. I was like, you had the money for your closing costs. All you would have done is finance that money that you didn't give up front into your loan. Now you're paying way more in 30 years.
Yeah. If all else stays the same and you never refinance, that 15K is going to cost you more than 15K.
Correct.
Where if you had the money up front, it just cost you 15K.
Right.
Right. And you're actually making a positive amount because it cost you no interest on that money. The equity builds on that money quicker, right? Because there's no interest, there's no fee to it.
Another way you can structure it, Mark, is on the offer, you can ask for the seller to pay for for certain things like escrow fees and title fees
Yeah.
as well. And then that way you don't have to come out of pocket or
Yeah, I
finance
mean, you
less.
could in
Yeah.
each county.
You
and
got to structure it right.
That's a good point because escrow fees are negotiable. Closing cost fees are negotiable in a transaction. Now, we have like a little sheet of paper that shows each county. In each county, it's weird, dude, because each county, the closing costs, the escrow fees, and the title insurance, that's just like kind of how it's done in those counties, but it's not like mandatory.
Correct. Especially in a market like today.
So like Contra Costa County, most counties in the Bay Area, I want to say like 8 of the 9 Bay Area counties, it's 100% on the buyer, right? I could be wrong. It's one of those. It's a large percentage, right? Majority of them, it's 100% of the buyer, meaning when you write the offer, the expectation is that the buyer's going to cover the escrow fees and the buyer's going to cover like the title insurance and stuff like that. And then the seller covers like the transfer tax, the county transfer tax, right? And then depending on the city, Oakland, Richmond, some of the cities that have a city transfer tax, it's usually split 50-50, okay? But what Victor is saying is that stuff can be negotiated up front. So in the offer, you can, if you're like, hey, man, no one's writing an offer on this home. I'm going to be the only one. I don't want to pay these fees. We can draft up the offer and say, hey, here's our offer. However, this portion of the closing costs, we want you to cover, seller. That way it's less money out of pocket. Look, will they say yes? We don't know. But it all depends on the situation. But to your point, that can be done as well. Instead of trying to finance it and ask for it back, you might be able to say, hey, we can give you this, but we need you to cover this.
We'll give you this as long as you cover this.
Exactly.
It's doable, especially if you're the only offer, especially if the home has been on the market for X amount of days.
And then you're not financing as much as the full closing costs. So, there's ways to structure, and this is where like having an agent that understands how things work, having an agent that's able to call the other agent and explain things to them and negotiate back and forth with him or her and really come to a resolution that's beneficial to the buyer and the seller. Because at the end of the day, we want everybody to win on both sides, right? As much as possible. But we're always going to have the best. If we're representing the buyer, we have the best interest of our client. That's the buyer. And if we're representing the seller, we're going to have the best interest of the seller. But sometimes you do have to dance a little bit back and forth to make things happen.
Usually, I would say, I don't know, high percentage of transactions, you come to a happy median. That's what happens.
Yeah.
The seller might not get necessarily what he wanted, and the buyer might not get necessarily what they wanted, but it's enough to make the deal happen.
Yeah.
And that's how we do more transactions and close
so,
more deals.
I mean, I think that was a pretty good explanation of what credits are. So it's just a way to finance some of the extra costs associated with purchasing a home, which is closing costs and interest rates, like buy down. Interest rate buy down basically means you're prepaying a fee to prepay interest. So when it's like, oh, we're going to buy down the rate, that's just you paying the interest up front to lock in that lower rate. And there's even temporary ones where it can drop your rate. And you guys might have heard something like this. It's called a 2-1 buy down. It's really popular right now. Builders are even giving it. So essentially the builder is going to prepay interest for you for 2 years to bring your rate down to a certain percentage for year 1. And then it goes up and they prepay a little bit more for year 2. So the first 2 years, it kind of lowers your monthly payment. Keep in mind, though, you still have to qualify for what the actual interest rate is.
That's correct.
It just saves you some money over the first year or two.
If you can't get over the hump of having to pay twice as much as what you pay for rent, which is the usual case in some,
I mean,
in some areas, it depends.
Rent's pretty crazy, bro.
Sometimes it's not as high, but I'm just saying in some areas.
Right now, in some areas, rent's higher than, look, if you're listening to this nationwide, right?
We're in the Bay Area.
Outside of California and some big metropolitan areas, rent is usually equal to, or in some cases right now, more than the national average. Though I did one of those, I did an educational video on this. The national average rent is actually higher than the average mortgage right now by like $200. But that's the whole 50 states, right? In California,
can we tell them why?
So Southern California, Northern California, Bay Area, whatever, like mortgages more than likely will be higher than your rent. But not by it's rent's catching up though.
Right. And the reason for that is because when rates fell to an all-time low during COVID, everyone refinanced. If you had a higher rate or if you bought during that time,
True,
you had a super low rate. Now they're more than I would say, or 3 times as much as what it was. So that's why it's a hard pill to swallow for someone that's renting around that. And
I tell you though, like certain cities, like we bought that rental in San Antonio, brand new home. My mortgage, my all-in payment is less than what I rented for. Not by much, but whoever's renting that property is paying more than me because I had the means to purchase it. You get what I'm saying? So it's it's area specific, bro. Like we're not, and I'm not here to like, hey, trust me. I wish, I wish we were doing this podcast where we're sitting right now, that it made more sense for everybody to purchase, because it would make our job a lot easier, because we would have way more people that wouldn't factor that in, right? Like, oh, my rent's cheaper. It allows me to live this certain lifestyle. But rent is never cheaper, because rent is a depreciating asset. You never see that money.
Yeah, no. So, look, I could give multiple scenarios where clients have been living in their property for 2-3 years and they have to maybe sell it or go back to renting. My advice is don't sell it. Don't sell it, because eventually that home is going to go up in price enough so that you're actually on the plus end of the equity, and they're having to sell it because they're negative equity.
Got you.
And so, like, the thing is that they recover the money that they actually invested in at the beginning. You never lose your money is what I'm trying to get to.
I mean, you can. I don't want. Odds are in your favor that you're going to make money.
Right.
Historically, home ownership is not like crypto or whatever. It's not a short play. It's even those stocks and stuff, they're all long-term investments. So in the history of home ownership, if you were to own the home for 30 years, the percentage of you making more than what you paid for it is a lot higher than you losing. Right. You can even take people that bought the home during, like, right before the crash. They paid peak prices in 2006, 2007. And then the crash happened and the values got plummeted by like over half. Wow. However, if people held on to those homes now, they would be on the plus side in equity. Their home would be worth more than them buying it at the peak in 06 and 07, because they held on to it for 18 plus years.
And that's my point, Mark.
Exactly.
My point is this is a long-term investment.
Exactly.
It's not a short-term investment. And if you hold on it enough, you're always going to make money.
Yeah. And to wrap this up, you can get into that long-term investment quicker because there's something out there called seller credits. And now that you understand how they work, the positives, the pros and cons, I don't like to say negatives, the pros and cons of getting a seller credit, you may be closer than you think. That $25K that is just sitting in that CD getting $1.45 a month might be time to cash it out and take the little $25 penalty and hit us up and get you into a home. Because if you need another 10 to 15K right now in this buyer's environment, there's a good opportunity that we can negotiate that for you. It's not guaranteed, But we have way more leverage now than when we did a couple years ago when everybody was buying and the interest rates were super low. And mortgages are a cycle. I'm just going to end this on this. Right now, we are in a cycle that benefits buyers. The cycle that benefits sellers is around the corner. Don't wait until it's too late. Agree?
Agree.
All right, guys. And with that, we look forward to winning with you.